In this video we'll break down exactly how the price development in the Huracan market compares to other cars, like its rivals from Ferrari, Porsche, McLaren and Audi, and figure out if, from a value perspective, you might be better off with one of its competitors. It might surprise you, Huracan values are holding up quite well. Welcome to the first market update for the Lamborghini Huracan. So you might be thinking about buying a Huracan, or perhaps you already own one, and at the same time care about its values. That's not so strange, Huracans come with a hefty price tag. Moreover, when you think about it, they are at an interesting spot in the market. They're one of the few cars that still come with a naturally aspirated V10. That must count for something, right? However, at the same time, they're less exclusive than, let's say, a Ferrari or a McLaren. Let's investigate if any of this had an effect on the price development, but we'll first get up to speed on the Huracan market. How did the market look at the end of February and what models will we cover in the video? Over here you can see the US market split by model type. We won't go too much into the details, but let's cover the most interesting price levels. We can see, for example, that LP580s and 610s are priced approximately the same. A 580 will cost you $10,000 more, but this mainly is because they have a lower mileage. What's also interesting is the price level across the model years. There's hardly any value loss when you move from the right to the left. That's impressive. It's also interesting that there's a slight overlap between the high mileage Performantes and the low mileage LP580s. On a like-for-like basis though, you need to bring approximately $88,000 more for a Performante. If we transition to the EVOs, we can see that prices jump. They go for a premium of approximately $100,000. That's a big chunk of cash. We can also see that the older cars are quite a bit cheaper than the younger ones, but this is quite a natural pattern for a market that is not so old. Finally, we can see that STO prices are exceptionally high. They go for approximately $470,000, and this is a lot higher than the market top of approximately $350,000 for all the other cars. Nevertheless, all these prices are relatively high compared to where they were. You see, car prices increased significantly during the pandemic and topped around the summer of 2022. Since then, most cars started to depreciate again, but some more than others. Mid-engine Ferraris, for example, softened, but remained very strong. In fact, it might be one of the strongest markets that I'm currently tracking. Let's see if that conclusion still holds after we compare it to the Huracan market. So how will we do this? We'll have a look at the price trends for the Huracan models, starting with the oldest ones and ending with the newest ones. For each of the models we'll make a comparison to the competitors from Porsche, McLaren, Ferrari and Audi. And to keep things a bit organized, I won't include too many details for those cars. You can check out the links in the video description if you want to get a market update for any of those brands. But we have a lot of things to do, so let's get going. Over here we have the price trend for the LP580 and 610, and you can see that they are concave. Like in the rest of the market, prices soared during the pandemic and are now cooling off. Compared to April 2020, prices are up by 26% or $49,500 in the LP580 market and by 21% or $40,000 in the LP610 market. During the last 3 months though, prices decreased slightly in this market. They came down by 1.3%, but this drop isn't statistically confirmed, so it could be the result of chance. And this by itself is a strong result. Many other cars saw drops of 4 to 6% during the last 3 months. Now before we continue, we need to address a crucial issue here. You can see that I'm missing a lot of data, or at least more than usual. I don't have any data between April 2020 and August 2021 and between August 21 and November 22. Especially the last period is crucial. It is during this time frame that prices peaked and started to decrease. So it could be the case that prices were actually much higher than what you see here. Therefore, it's important to only make point-to-point comparisons between the Huracan and other models and to avoid focusing on the shape of the trend. And speaking about those other models, let's add some of them to the graph. We start by adding some cheaper ones. Over here we have the price trends for the two Huracans and the ones for the 992 GT3 and Turbo, McLaren 570S, 650S and Acura NSX. Why did I pick these cars, you might ask? Well, because the median model years are the same as in the Huracan markets. 2015 and 2018. Now I was quite surprised to find out how expensive the Huracans actually are. Nothing really comes close in terms of price point. To some extent, this is caused by the strong prices in the Huracan market. If we look at the full length for each trend, we can see that NSXs, GT3s and 650Ss are all up by 15% and that 570Ss are up by 10%. And all these numbers are much lower than the 21 and 26% in the Huracan market. You can see that this isn't a perfect comparison, since the dates do not line up perfectly, but it's clear that the Huracans held up extremely well. Even if we look at the short-term trends during the last 3 months, we can see that they are pointing down for almost all cars, with exception of the Huracans. So all in all, this is a great result. But again, if you want to know more about the other cars that I cover in this video, please head over to my channel. Over there you'll find detailed market analysis. But now then, let's see if the Huracan's performance is also strong when we add some other cars in the mix. Over here I added the 488, 458 and the facelift version of the second generation Audi R8 V10 Plus. And look at that, the price trends for the Huracans and 458s are insanely close. The increase rate in the 458 market is slightly higher at 28.4%, but there's not much in it. Again, this is an excellent result for the Huracan. The price trend in the 458 market is extremely strong, and as I mentioned before, one of the strongest ones I'm currently tracking. We can also see that 488s are priced quite a bit above the Huracans, even though that the cars have a similar age. The premium is approximately $60,000. The increase in the 488 market is with 15% lower than in the Huracan market, but we also missed some months in the beginning of 2020. Things are completely different in the R8 market. This car is a lot newer and was of course priced below the Huracan. And this means that in the beginning of 2020, an almost brand new R8 was approximately as expensive as a 2-year-old Huracan. Prices however developed completely different. R8s are up by only 4% compared to the start of the pandemic. The increase rate was lower than in some other markets, while the decrease rate is on par with the rest. So from a depreciation standpoint, you were better off by paying the 10k premium for a 2-year-old Huracan in 2020. Isn't hindsight a beautiful thing? And with that it's time to have a look at the Performante. But before we do so, if you find this video helpful in your buying or selling process, or just enjoy looking at the numbers, please support the channel by clicking on this like button down below. Thank you. Over here we have the price trends for the Performante, and you can see that it has the same concave shape as the price trends in the LP580 and 610 markets, but the drop at the end is slightly larger. Compared to April 2020, prices are up by 21.5% or $60,000. Not a bad result, especially if you consider that prices dropped by 3.5% during the last 3 months. Let's add some other cars to this graph. Over here we have now the 720S, 600LT and 991.2 GT3 RS. And this gives some interesting perspectives. Look for example at the trend of the 600LT and the GT3 RS, they are close to identical. Both cars decreased by 9% compared to their market tops. For this time period though, we don't have enough data to make a direct comparison to the Huracan. That's a shame. However, given the development during the last 3 months, the Huracan might not be too far off. We can also see that the price trend for the 720S looks a bit strange. It's the only one that's trending down. That is, however, the result of the new cars and the spiders. Coupes from 2018 and 2019 actually increased. But I recommend that you check out the latest McLaren market update if you want to know more about this. Now looking at the long-term trend, we can see that GT3 RSs are up by 18.4% and that this is quite close to the 21.5% of the Performantes. So again, a really strong result for the Huracan. I by the way contemplated to include the 458 Speciale over here, but to be honest, prices are so far up by now that there's not really any point in comparing them to the Performante. And that brings us to the most recent models, the EVOs. Over here we have the price trends for the normal EVO, the rear-wheel driven version and the STO. The price trend of the EVO has this typical concave shape that we also saw in the LP580 and 610 market. The increase rate is however a lot lower. Prices are up by 15% of $40,000 compared to April 2020. The EVO is of course a lot newer, so this makes sense. Now if we look at the trend for the rear-wheel driven variant, we can see that it looks a bit strange due to the interpolation between August and November. So let's focus on the median data points. These reveal that prices are at the same level as in November. The first data point though is a little bit sketchy. There are only 28 cars listed for sale, while there are currently 112 cars for sale. Now for the STO I only have 2 data points available. They do reveal that prices decreased by 5%, but we don't have enough context for this decrease. So we'll focus on the normal EVO. And that means that it's time to add some other cars to the graph and to investigate if this 15% increase in the EVO market is good or bad. Over here we have the 720S, 488, MC20 and F8. Due to some technical reasons that I won't bore you with, I only included the price trends for the coupes. So the 720S and 488 price trends are slightly different than the ones that we saw before. 720S coupes increased by 13% and 488 coupes by 19%. So the 488 increased slightly more than the Huracan and the 720S slightly less, but there's not much in it. Also remember that we're missing the last 2 months over here. Now if we look at the F8 coupe, we can see that they're significantly more expensive, approximately $110,000. During last year, prices increased by 2.1%, and based on the limited data that we have, the same number could apply to the Huracan market. The real outlier over here is the MC20. We only have 6 months worth of data, but it's clear that prices are decreasing. In August 22, prices were higher than for the Huracan, but currently they are approximately $25,000 lower. If we then aggregate our findings from this graph, I think that based on this limited data, we can conclude that EVO prices held up quite well. And with that it's time to wrap up and conclude. We compared the price trends of the Huracan to many other cars, and we can only conclude one thing. Huracan prices are relatively strong. The increase rates are on par with some mid-engine Ferraris, a market segment that has one of the strongest price trends. Also the price developments during the last 3 months are impressive. Prices were flat or decreased marginally, and this is different than the rest of the market. Many other cars saw drops of 4 to 6%. Of course, the comparisons that we did aren't perfect, so don't get too hung up on the exact percentages. I do however think that they were good enough to determine where the Huracan falls on the price strength scale. Now it will be interesting to see how all of this develops going forward. If this video does well, I will probably update the Huracan market every 3 months, just like I do for some 911s. If it tanks, I probably do half-yearly updates. In any case, I recommend that you subscribe to stay up to date on the Huracan market or the exotic car market in general. Pricing dynamics are very interesting at the moment, but more about that in a different video. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next week for a new market update.